Did anyone understand what I just said? Okay, we got some. I just introduced myself in sign language. This is my name, and this is my name, fingerspelled, using the letters of the American Sign Language alphabet, ASL. The last part of my introduction, though, is the most important. This is my name sign in ASL. Now, maybe you've taken an ASL class before, or maybe you're part of the deaf and hard of hearing community. But for most of us, you probably have no idea what a name sign is and the high importance it holds in deaf culture. I didn't at first. I remember sitting down in a small desk chair similar to the ones you're sitting in right now, filled with excitement, as a classic freshman 2 years ago during my first day of ASL class at Hopkins. However, I was quickly confused when my professor introduced himself very similarly to how I just did, and showed us his name sign, but proceeded to sign he would not be giving any of us a name sign. Why was this such a big deal? I was curious to find out, so I looked more into name signs, and two things really stuck out to me. The first, name signs are always given by deaf people. Even for a deaf hearing baby, or even for a deaf baby born to hearing parents, they don't receive a name sign until they interact with the deaf community. My professor supported this finding by explaining to the whole class that in order for us to get a name sign, we would first have to connect with the deaf community. Learning ASL, even to an advanced level, was simply not enough. We had to try to use the language to form a meaningful connection with the deaf community. The second thing I found out was that name signs consist of using the initial of a person's name, or can be descriptive and based on a feature or behavior, or can be a combination of both. Regardless, name signs serve much more than just a way to identify a person. They actually show you about who that person is and include that person. They represent that this person is an integral part of the deaf community. They include and connect that person into the deaf community. I was impressed by the deaf culture value of connection and relationship that reminded me of my own personal Mexican culture. So I continued taking the beautiful language of ASL for the next 2 years. By the end of last spring, though, I realized that in order for me to keep learning more, I now had to fully immerse myself in the deaf community to get all those aspects of ASL that extend beyond the linguistics of its language or production. That's why this past summer, I decided to intern at the Center for Deaf and Hearing Purposes, called HDS, in Pittsburgh. I was placed in the live design program, and even though I had no idea what that meant, I was eager to find out. However, I was quickly surprised when my supervisor, on the very first day, told me that the purpose of that program was to serve a fully deaf group of individuals in forming interpersonal social relationships and interaction. That whole entire day, I spent the time thinking how I would get through the summer trying to fulfill the program's goal while having limited language. I mean, I could barely say my name. That's when I realized I had always thought of language as some sort of transactional, self-driven tool. I mean, how many times a day do we use language to communicate our needs, our demands, our desires? Things like turning up to your classmate and saying, I need to take a nap, I'm so tired. Or hold the door for me to the person in front of you. Or even the barista, which you've known for years for getting your classic chai pumpkin latte. How much do you really know about them? We all have people in our lives who we know for name by years, and yet, when you really think about them, could you describe them beyond that? We think that by having a conversation, we have a relationship with someone, yet we're always thinking of language as something that gives us something in return, some outcome, whether it be through text, email, or even face-to-face interaction. We have that same experience with transactional language. I'd like to introduce now two people, specifically from HDS, that showed me how to use interactional language truly to connect with others. Vendetta and David. Vendetta is a deaf individual who is incredibly creative. She would always love showing the HDS staff and clients her newest sketch, so it didn't take long for me to realize her passion and her incredibly talent in art. She had every single page filled with cities, landscapes, places from all over the world, and local towns as well. So one day, after being impressed on how well she had been able to draw the Eiffel Tower, if you really think about it, it's a very complex structure, I decided to approach her and ask her why she had drawn that. This question led to her showing me every single page in that sketchbook. She told me that some of them were from her family back home in Philadelphia, some of them were from other places she had visited, and some of them were just cool places she liked and seen pictures of. ASL, being an incredibly descriptive language, facilitated this dialogue, as things like lights or cars or houses and buildings were much easier to understand. Certain drawings of hers reminded me of my own home. So before I knew it, we were talking about our family, I was telling her more about where I grew up, and we were sharing our youth stories. Walking out of HDS that day, I felt very inspired. Not only because I felt like I was finally contributing to the program's oversight, but because I realized we had used language to build upon each other's stories to get to know each other authentically. Now, David's and I connection was very different. I met David the second day at HDS, but we never really had any conversations throughout the summer. David has poor balance, so he walks very minimally, and we always used to wheel him around during any outings, but he was very specific as to who he signed with, interacted with, even wouldn't let some people wheel him, only certain. Although I would ask him periodically, "How are you? Do you need anything? What are you doing?" My questions never really led to anything, so even though I could communicate these basic things with him, we had a large disconnect that I didn't think would change. My last day at HDS, though, the staff and the clients threw a surprise goodbye party for me. And although I was already incredibly touched by their generosity and kindness, I was even more amazed when David, from across the room, stood up and slowly but surely walked all the way up to me and signed, "Hug." Through this one gesture, I knew what he was trying to share with me. I knew we were both trying to express our feelings for what the summer had meant and the goodbye that followed. David's approach showed me that there was more than one way to communicate in language. He didn't use many signs or words to reach out, but that interaction on the last day was intentional and engaging. ASL has taught me how to use language to connect rather than to just communicate. Given its high representational and 3D components like face expression and body signals, the language innateness itself makes it easier to feel like you're actually interacting with someone as you sign to them, rather than just speaking. Knowing some of the language, though, was only half the battle for me, as I still had to learn how to use the language intentionally to connect, rather than just get by forming what seems like an illusion of a relationship when we use transactional language, similar to the barista. Unlike ASL, in English, and a lot of spoken languages, knowing someone's name doesn't instantly tell you much about that person. Yet, every single one of your names has a meaning and has a story. But we won't really find much about that story until we ask. My name sign was given to me because my name starts with a K, this is the K, and the people at HDS thought I had long, straight black hair, which is a descriptive feature of Mexican hair culture. My name sign has a history that reminds me where I came from, where I've been, and the experiences that have shaped me into who I am today. But today, I don't just want to share my story. I want to share the story of how my connection with the deaf community has transformed entirely how I want to use language. Yet every single one of us sitting down in this room is part of a larger community that ultimately needs to be fueled by authentic connection in order to progress, to grow. So I ask y'all now, whose story will you seek out next? Thank you.